Review Vice President Jack Fowler, the co-host, but I'm really just here like you to get a big dose of weekly wisdom from the eminent historian and social analyst. The Victor Davis Hanson podcast is produced by the dedicated Sarah Schutte, keeping the plates spinning from Ohio and connecting me in Connecticut with our California-based star, who I'd like to remind all is the Martin and Ilse Anderson Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution and a National Review Institute Senior Fellow, also the author of The Case for Trump and many other terrific books. On today's program, we will discuss Victor's forthcoming NR piece out tomorrow, Tuesday, on the emerging, quite partisan military intelligence complex, his thoughts on statue toppling and base renaming, and on what Victor calls the bitter irony of revolutions. Let's also discuss Senator Graham's planned judiciary hearings on the Flynn plotters, Black Lives Matters being a Marxist front, media madness, and if we can get to it, the Seattle Chaz. Victor, the sun is shining today in Milford, Connecticut. I hope it's shining for you in Selma, but it's hardly a sufficient distraction to the insanities roiling the country, but let's distract ourselves with a heaping helping of your insight if you're ready. Okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay, good. Item one, to quote John McLaughlin, issue one. The piece out tomorrow on NRO. I'll add the link to the show notes when it's available. And I got an advanced copy of your article from our great friend, Molly Powell. Victor, it's about what you call the military intelligence complex. It's loaded with a ton of stuff. I break it down into three areas. One is Joe Biden's repeating this claim that's picking up some currency with the left and with the media. Donald Trump is, if he loses the election, is going to declare a coup, not going to leave the White House. Biden's also hit Biden's glorying in the criticisms of the president by some of the retired military generals and chiefs. And then you write about General Mark Milley and also about Colin Powell. So there's lots in here, but would you talk first about what Joe Biden is saying in his basement and what kind of impact do you think that has on our republic?
Well, Joe Biden, in an interview the other day, said that the retired generals, that 10 to 12, and he was referring specifically to the most recent comments of Marine General James Mattis, General McCaffrey, Admiral McRaven, former Joint Chief. In that context of criticizing Trump for using the federal Capitol Police and the false allegation that some of them made that they had used tear gas. They didn't. They used a pepper spray agent. But nonetheless, then four former Joint Chiefs, Mullen, Colin Powell, I'll have to remember the other two. I'll remember, Myers, and there's another one. They came out, Dempsey, all four of them. They came out and criticized Trump as well, and it was all orchestrated because it was all within a 48-hour period. And then Biden on national TV was bragging that he said they had skinned him alive, and in conjunction with active military personnel, when Trump lost the election, he wouldn't leave, and then he would employ these people to evict him. And this all comes in a larger context, as I wrote in the article last week, which got a lot of heated opposition to, that Mattis, Hayden, and McCaffrey had used fascistic Nazi similes. Mattis had compared the divisiveness of Trump to what the Nazis tried to stir up on D-Day, and I think it was McCaffrey called him, as we discussed last week, Trump. Mussolini. Hayden tweeted out a death camp picture earlier. And then McRaven said, the sooner the better. I could go on, but there were a lot of incendiary comments from some of our most hallowed generals, and in conjunction with the Joint Chiefs. And what was I trying to say? that we're really entering dangerous times, because when you have generals making statements about fascistic presidents, or they're making statements wink and nod that maybe Trump should leave, or they're making statements that he's broken the law or violated the Constitution, and then you juxtapose that with what Brennan has said, that he should leave and he's dangerous, and what Clapper has said, and what Comey has said, and what McCabe have said, and then you juxtapose all of that with what Schumer said, I wouldn't mess with the intelligence agents, they have ways to get you, or Samantha Power has tweeted out, I wouldn't get in the wrong side of John Brennan. You put all of that together, and you're starting to see that people who have never been elected to a single office feel that because they don't like the president of the United States, they have the right to overturn an election, or at least cripple him to such a degree to impair his effectiveness as commander-in-chief. And so I called all of that the military intelligence, not industrial, but intelligence complex.
Victor, what were some of the criticisms you just mentioned? You took a lot of heat. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I'm going to send you a formal reply to one. It was in, of course, the Bill Kristol Bulwark. I think the person said I should retire, not generals. But it was incoherent. They're basically saying, oh, well, mentioning Mussolini, or you mention a Nazi slogan about divide, that's not really, they're not really associating Trump with Nazis. Of course they are, and they would say that. And then when Mattis said something like, we can unite without him, and we have to oppose him, and we have to resist his constitutional mockery, that's not out of the way. Or, yes, there is a uniform code of military conduct, and yes, it does apply to retired officers, but since nobody has ever been court-martialed under it, therefore you're raising, a bogeyman that doesn't exist. Well, just because it doesn't, not enforced. I mean, the Obama administration was quite eager to use the Logan Act.
Right.
This was a lot more egregious than that. So just things like that, but more that I'm a Trump apologist. I wrote a book for Trump. I have no ethical standing, that kind of stuff.
Well, it seems to be, Victor, we discussed this last week, but a lot of projection from folks who were, actively, not the military, but Biden and company actively engaged in trying to prevent the next presidency from having any legs to stand on. And what you bring up about the orchestrated responses in a short period of time by the generals of such stature, it just doesn't seem coincidental. And if it's not coincidental, it's organized. And when generals organize something in such a way in a political arena, it's right for people, the hair on the back of people's necks to go up and say, what the hell's going on here? Anyway, that said, General Milley, you also criticize him in this piece. Would you talk about what he did last week or 2 weeks ago?
Well, Mac Owens had written a really good article for you guys about showboating. And the point is, if you go back and look at prior Joint Chiefs, you learn two things. They were very eager to please the president, and I quoted Colin Powell in 1992 when Bush asked to send 4,800 Marines to the Los Angeles riot zone following the Rodney King verdict. Colin Powell told Bush aide, just call him, I'm ready to go. He had no problem with it. He does now have a problem with Trump doing it, but he didn't have a problem when the patrician Bush did it. And so Miley knows, is it Mealy or Miley? I thought it was Miley. I don't know how you pronounce it.
You say potato. Say potato. Milley, not sure.
Yes. So he knew that generals do that all the time, that they follow orders to use federal troops. We've listed them in many articles. Many of the writers have listed all, going back to James Madison, to Lincoln, to Hoover. So he knows that was a red herring, and he knows if you went through all the presidencies and looked at the photo ops with Obama and McRaven or somebody, posing Obama, remember Bin Laden is dead and GM is alive, all of that sloganeering, and often at the sides of generals. That was never an issue before. And suddenly Miley says, well, you know, I just thought about it, and it was a violation of civilian military distancing, and I want to apologize. Well, he wants to apologize because all of his friends that were former Joint Chiefs and four-star admirals and generals called him up and asked him to resign if he didn't apologize, and he's afraid to get on their wrong side. So he thinks Trump is in a bad spot now. His polls are going down, so he's going to virtue signal his independence. But believe me, if a retired general hadn't have said anything, and Trump's polls were at 55 right now, then he wouldn't have said a damn thing. That's what's really frightening about all of this. And this raises a larger issue, and it's very controversial. I'm not making any accusations, but I really think that unknowingly this night of the generals, or if I could call it that, and admirals, when they're all coming out and they're all virtue signaling, it redirects attention to their behavior. And by that I mean Obama fired, three or four, he fired Flynn, he fired McChrystal, he fired Mattis, he fired Cartwright, he fired Petraeus. Then he systematically violated the Constitution. He weaponized the IRS to go after his political enemies. He surveilled the Associated Press journalist. He sicked the FBI and the CIA on oppositional